You cannot outrun a bad diet. Typically used in the context of weight loss, it's a catchy way for fitness folks to say that regardless of the amount of cardio, crunches, and booty squats you do, you cannot lose weight if you eat poorly, especially eating excess calories. But hold on a minute, how accurate is this really? If we examine the relevant scientific data and look both directly at and beyond weight loss, then the only thing this catchphrase seems to outrun is the truth. Kind of. In this video, we'll go over this popular phrase and discover how, in some ways, outrunning a bad diet can in fact be possible. First, let's be clear about weight loss. If you are trying to lose weight, then your primary goal is creating an energy deficit or expending more energy measured in calories than you consume. To achieve this, for most people, adjusting your diet is the superior and most efficient method. We've heard countless comparisons like this before. What's better, skipping that second scoop of Rocky Road ice cream or running 3 miles to burn it off? Diet has an undeniably enormous impact, and all your exercise efforts can be effectively wiped away by just a few bad dietary choices. Thus, you cannot outrun a bad diet. It's wonderfully fitting and simple, isn't it? And it's quite hard to imagine contesting this statement up until you actually think about it just a bit longer. You cannot outrun a bad diet. Wait, does that also apply to muscle, strength, or what if you're just trying to maintain your weight? What about health? And also, are we absolutely sure we can't lose weight with a bad diet? Digging for answers to these questions is where the phrase starts falling a bit apart. First, let's look at muscle and strength, which seems to directly challenge this concept. Exercise, especially resistance training, is the essential ingredient for muscle and strength development, and no matter how many protein shakes you guzzle down, a good diet will struggle to build any significant muscle and strength without the necessary exercise-induced physiological stimuli. Now, a good diet paired with good exercise is the best case scenario, especially a diet high in protein and a surplus in calories. But growth has shown to occur even without a good diet, including being in a calorie deficit. Now, to be fair, under these circumstances, the results are mostly observed in beginners with little training experience, but improvements were observed in advanced trainers as well, but to a noticeably smaller extent. So in this case, the roles are kind of reversed. If you want to build muscle and get stronger, it's not that you cannot outrun a bad diet. Instead, it's more like you cannot outchew bad training habits. That was good, wasn't it? But I get it, when talking about outrunning a bad diet, it is usually in the context of weight loss. As I mentioned earlier, it's generally more efficient to lose weight by eating fewer calories than by burning more with exercise. But saying that you absolutely cannot lose weight with a bad diet only holds well under the assumption that your exercise is perpetually insufficient to overcome the calorie surplus created by the bad diet. Like, let's say, for example, you're in a 300-calorie surplus by eating only junk food, which most would agree is a bad diet. What does it mean then if you burn an extra 400 calories doing cardio, which puts you in a calorie deficit? Does that mean that your junk food diet is no longer bad? Well, of course not. It's still bad, but by doing the cardio, you can technically now lose weight. And we have seen studies show this, like in 2012, where adding 30 minutes of cardio a day, overweight sedentary subjects lost on average 8 pounds over 13 weeks, even though they were specifically instructed to eat without any dietary restrictions, yet still their calorie intake never really changed. Now, could they have lost more weight if they changed their diet instead? Probably. But the fact is that overweight and sedentary subjects did lose weight by adding exercise and making zero dietary changes, which means they were effectively outrunning their so-called bad diet. If we do lose weight, we also have to consider what happens after. Unfortunately, reports show that a staggeringly high 80% of people that lose weight eventually gain it back. But for the 20% that didn't, one of the most common traits they all shared was, you guessed it, they avoided eating that disgusting excuse for a vegetable called kale. And they exercised. Now, weight regain is a huge issue that needs to be tackled in health and fitness and worthy of its own video topic in the future. But knowing that exercise is one of the key components to mitigate weight regain, further highlights its importance in the grand scheme of things. Speaking of grand scheme of things, nothing is more important than doing the right things for the sake of your overall health. If we prioritize health, then certainly a good diet is irrefutably imperative. But hypothetically speaking, and for the sake of this topic, can exercise outrun any negative health impacts caused by a bad diet? This is where the almighty and completely original answer of "it depends" comes into play. First, some straightforward stuff. Exercise and generally higher levels of fitness are strongly associated with reducing health risk factors for things like hypertension, type 2 diabetes, depression, and even certain cancers. This happens regardless of diet quality, making exercise, unsurprisingly, great for your health. But the findings do get a bit more interesting in the assessment of mortality risks. Mortality risks do generally reduce with exercise, but whether it outruns the effects of diet is not so cut and dry. We can elegantly elaborate this point with a 2022 prospective cohort study, where the researchers found that going from little to no added physical activity to about 30 to 60 minutes of daily moderate to vigorous physical activity strongly reduced cardiovascular disease, cancer, and all-cause associated mortality risks. The interesting part is that when people engage in 30 to 60 minutes of daily physical activity while having a poor quality diet, they observed lower CVD and all-cause associated mortality risks compared to people eating a high-quality diet but exercised very little. Which kind of makes you think that, hey, in terms of mortality, maybe we can outrun a bad diet after all. Well, not so fast. For the sake of our health, we don't want just better, but the best possible outcome. In that case, the findings showed that the greatest mortality risk reductions only occurred in those with a high-quality diet paired with anywhere between 30 minutes to 2 hours of daily moderate to vigorous physical activity. So yes, we are not outrunning a bad diet, but we also can't rely on diet alone. Now, up to this point, I've been mostly making the case supporting the idea that in many ways, you can truly outrun a bad diet. But now, I want to present you with a different set of data showing people that adamantly believe you cannot outrun a bad diet might have some scientific leg to stand on. And that data is on something called compensation. Oftentimes, weight loss research employing exercise interventions observed a compensation effect, where subjects spontaneously consumed more calories than they normally do, seemingly compensating for the calories burned from exercise. Of course, if you do that, you'll have a much harder time losing weight and outrunning your diet. The reason this compensation occurs isn't really clear. Some research suggests that there is an acute uptick in hedonistic drive towards fatty and sweet foods after exercise. Some suggest exercise-induced alterations to appetite-regulating hormones like acylated ghrelin and GLP-1 that can influence hunger ratings. Some even attempt to link it to genetics, but overall, none of them are definitive. Fortunately, people on average only compensate about 30% of the exercise-induced calorie expenditure, which doesn't seem too bad until we look at the shockingly high variation between individual subjects. Some subjects might not compensate anything or even eat less, whereas some compensate everything or even overcompensate and eat more. In some studies, like a study in 2005, this variability in compensation is reflected in the clear variability in weight outcomes between individual subjects, which also shows that compensation tends to be higher in women than men. We wouldn't have known any of this if we only focused on that initial 30% average. So what do we do with this information? Well, some researchers have introduced the idea that for the sake of tailoring the best personalized weight loss strategies, we should identify people as either compensators, people that tend to increase intake with exercise, or non-compensators, people that tend to maintain or decrease intake with exercise. In that case, your thoughts on outrunning a bad diet can be heavily influenced by your classification. If you're a compensator, you might think it's impossible to outrun a bad diet. But if you're a non-compensator, then you're probably wondering why people aren't outrunning the bad diets like you are. Tricky, isn't it? Our bodies are just so dang weird. And now some final thoughts. I'll be honest, making this video was a bit tough and frustrating. And it wasn't about the science, although there was plenty of data to comb through, but about how I presented the science. We can see now that things kind of swing in both directions, and I was a bit worried that people will only pick up the parts they wanted to hear. The last thing I wanted is any of you leaving this video with either the impression of exercise is so awesome that you can eat whatever you want, or exercise is a waste of time because you just compensate all of it anyway. The thing is, it was never about whether you can or cannot outrun a bad diet. Exercise is clearly very, very beneficial, but it does not allow complete freedom in your dietary choices. At the same time, you end up leaving a lot of benefits on the table if you choose to focus on diet alone. In the end, the boring statement of try to improve both your exercise and diet is still the best advice possible. And if that middle-of-the-road answer doesn't satisfy you, then welcome to life. If you stuck through the whole video, then first, thank you, but I would also love to hear your thoughts, whether you agree or disagree with the statement, your take on the data, everything. Let me know in the comments. Other than that, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a dietary thumbs up and share it with your exercise-loving friends. Subscribe for more. As always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to get your protein and exercise.